rational, level-headed, the kind of person who needed to see to believe. But what I'm about to tell you is going to sound out there. Listen, just hear me out. It all started about 6 months ago. I was walking home from my late shift at the hospital, and the streets were as quiet as they come. Just me and the distant hum of the city. That's when I saw it for the first time. Something out of the corner of my eye. A flicker of movement where there should have been stillness. I turned sharply, but there was nothing. Just the empty street and the echoing of my own footsteps. I laughed at myself, thinking the night shifts were finally getting to me. But then, it happened again. The next night, and the night after that. Always when I was alone. Always just a whisper of motion, too quick to catch. I started taking different routes home, but it didn't matter. Whatever it was following me. I could feel eyes on me, watching, calculating. I know how it sounds. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but you can't shake the feeling of being hunted once it's clawed into your mind. I decided to confront it. I stopped in my tracks one night, my heart pounding in the silence, and spoke into the shadows. "I know you're there," I said, my voice more steady than I felt. Nothing responded, but the air felt charged, heavy, as if it was laden with unspoken words. That's when I started noticing other things. Odd things. Lights in the sky that didn't move like planes or satellites. Strange static on my TV that would come and go in patterns, like a message I couldn't decipher. I began to record these occurrences, jotting down times and sketching what I saw in a notebook I kept hidden. I scoured the internet for anyone who might have experienced similar phenomena and found forums, threads buried under layers of skepticism and mockery, where people spoke of visitors and watchers. My days blurred into nights filled with research. I learned about patterns, about sightings that weren't just random but seemed almost strategic. I mapped them out, pushing pins into places where others had reported the same whisper of movement, the same fleeting shadows. The map grew crowded with pins, a web of silent encounters stretching across the city. One evening, as I traced another line connecting the sightings, it hit me. These weren't random. There was a pattern, a meticulous, deliberate pattern that centered around places like where I worked. Hospitals, places of power, centers of communication. It was as if they were learning, observing how we lived, how we healed, how we governed. And that's when the real fear settled in. Not the thrill of the hunt, but a cold, sinking dread. What did they want? Why the shadows? Why the secrecy? Were they just observing? Or was it something more invasive? Something we hadn't even begun to comprehend? So, there I was, no longer the skeptic, but a believer by necessity, drawn into a narrative I'd have scoffed at a year ago. I know it's hard to accept. It was hard for me too, but you can't unsee once your eyes are open. You can't stop knowing once the truth has made itself known. And the truth is, they are here, among us, watching, waiting, and I needed to find out why. You see, once you've glimpsed the bizarre, the unexplainable, it's like a thread hanging from the fabric of what you thought was reality. Pull it, and everything unravels. That's exactly what happened to me. I couldn't just go back to normal. Normal didn't exist anymore. Not for me. It became about proving what I'd seen, to myself, if to no one else. I started with the recordings, hours of footage from the night sky above my apartment, the empty streets on my way home from work. At first, it seemed futile, watching these tapes in the wee hours, my eyes burning from the glow of the screen. But then, one night, there it was. A brief but undeniable anomaly. A across the sky in a sharp zigzag, too fast, too precise for any man-made craft. I replayed the segment until the tape wore thin, each review etching the impossible into my mind. Emboldened, I invested in better equipment. Cameras with night vision, audio recorders sensitive enough to pick up the faintest sounds. I became a fixture in the electronics stores, the oddball who'd linger over the latest tech, but only buy gadgets that could serve my peculiar needs. I also dove deeper into the online communities. These forums became my lifeline, the only place I felt understood. I shared my recordings, my theories. In return, I received not just validation, but additional data, photos, videos, first-hand accounts from others who were just as eager to expose the truth. We were a mosaic of the obsessed, each contributing a piece to the larger, horrifying picture. And then there were the books. Tomes on UFO sightings, government cover-ups, historical anomalies that hinted at extraterrestrial intervention in human affairs. My apartment overflowed with stacks of literature, pages flagged and annotated. It was through these texts that I learned the patterns of their visits, their seeming interest in our technological and political hubs. Why? What was it about these sites that drew them? As my obsession grew, so did my isolation. Friends stopped calling. My family gave up trying to understand my new hobby, dismissing it as a phase, hoping I'd snap out of it. I couldn't blame them. I had changed. Where once there was light-hearted banter, now there were only warnings, urgent pleas for them to see what I saw. But how could they? They hadn't watched the shadows move. I started taking trips to known UFO hotspots, armed with my cameras and sensors. I'd sit out there, under the vast, starlit sky, waiting. Most nights, it was just me and the cold whisper of the wind. But sometimes, there was something else. A flicker of light, a strange hum piercing the quiet, a feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. Each encounter left me with more questions than answers, driving me further down the rabbit hole. It was on one of these trips that I met Dr. Helen Ramirez, a former astrophysicist who'd left her university post under mysterious circumstances. She found me one morning, surrounded by my equipment, and instead of the usual skepticism, she offered knowledge. Helen had been tracking their patterns too. She'd seen the craft, understood their technology, or at least as much as one could when dealing with such advanced beings. Together we formed a pact to combine our knowledge, our resources, to find out why they were here. Helen brought a scientific rigour to my self-taught sleuthing. She had theories about their propulsion systems, about how they could be using quantum mechanics in ways we'd only theorised. We spent nights mapping out their possible trajectories, days discussing the physics of wormholes and space-time. But the deeper we dug, the more we felt the weight of what we were uncovering. It wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was a mission, a responsibility. If we were right, if they really were here, then the implications were monumental. What did they want? Were they observers or precursors to something more sinister? I know how it sounds. I do. It sounds like madness, but when you've seen the world from this side, when you've touched the fabric of a deeper reality, how can you possibly turn back? How can you pretend the shadows are just shadows when you know they watch? They wait, and they are anything but human. I've always believed that certain moments in life are pivotal, moments that divide time into before and after. I reached my moment one evening last spring. It's etched into my memory with a clarity that haunts me. It was just past midnight, and I was out in the field with Helen, near an old communications array we suspected was a hotspot for extraterrestrial activity. observing a series of unexplained signal interruptions that coincided with increased UFO sightings in the area. The air was charged, tense with anticipation, or perhaps it was just our breaths, visible in the chilly night air, mingling with the static electricity that seemed to pulse around us. Then it happened, not with a whisper, but with a deafening silence that swallowed every sound around us. The equipment went dead, screens blank, meters flat, and there, above us, it appeared, a craft, undeniable in its existence, triangular, vast, with surfaces that absorbed light and reflected a darkness so deep it felt like looking into the void itself. My heart stopped, or maybe it raced. I couldn't tell. All I could do was stare in awe and terror as it hovered, silent and imposing, just a few 100 feet above. It was nothing like the grainy photos you see in tabloids. This was real, so palpably real that every cell in my body reacted. Fear, wonder, disbelief, all churned within me, battling for dominance. Helen grabbed my arm, her grip tight. "Do you see it?" she whispered, though there was no need for quiet. The silence was absolute. I could only nod, unable to tear my gaze away from the craft. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, a panel on the underside of the craft slid open, emitting a beam of light so intense it felt like pure energy. It didn't illuminate the ground. Rather, it seemed to draw the very essence of the earth up towards it. The grass, the soil, the scattered tools around us, they vibrated, particles dancing madly in the beam's embrace. And in that beam, in that horrifying and magnificent moment, I saw them. Beings. Not human, not like anything earthly. They were there, outlined in the shimmering light, tall, slender, with elongated limbs and large, opaque eyes that seemed to absorb everything. Their skin, if it was skin, shimmered with an iridescence that reminded me of oil on water. They didn't speak, not in words that we would understand, but I felt their presence in my mind, a pressure that was curious, probing. Panic set in then, the fear of the unknown, the realization of our absolute powerlessness. It struck me, bone deep and visceral. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand frozen under their gaze. But I couldn't move. I was transfixed, held by the sight and the silent conversation that seemed to pass through their eyes. It lasted only minutes, maybe less, but each second stretched, filled with lifetimes of questions and fears. Then, as suddenly as they had engaged us, they retracted the beam. The panel closed, and the craft slipped away, dissolving into the night as if it had never been. The equipment blinked back to life, a cacophony of beeping and static that sounded like the loudest noise in the world after such silence. Helen and I collapsed to the ground, gasping, not speaking for a long time. We were shaken, our view of the universe irrevocably altered. That night, I understood. They weren't just observing, they were interacting, studying not just our land but us, our reactions, our emotions, maybe even our souls. What did they learn from us? What had we shown them? Fear, wonder, defiance. I couldn't find the words then, and even now they elude me. But one thing was clear. We weren't alone. We'd never been alone. And now I knew they were not just among us, but part of us, witnesses to our existence as we had become to theirs. The revelation was not just about their presence. It was about our place in the cosmos, so small, yet part of something so vast, so incomprehensibly interconnected. From that day, everything changed. My mission, my fear, my awe, they all gained a new depth, a new urgency. We had to understand. had to prepare for what might come next, because one thing was certain, they would come again, and we needed to be ready, not just to meet them, but to understand them, and perhaps in doing so, to better understand ourselves. In the aftermath of that night, the world seemed to shift on its axis. Everything I had once known, or thought I knew, had been cast into doubt. The sun rose, as it always did. People went about their lives, oblivious to the cosmic ballet that had unfolded in the darkness above. But for me, nothing was the same. I took to the microphone that Helen had set up in our makeshift lab. A small room lined with monitors, maps, and endless reams of data. The red light blinked on, and I knew it was time to speak, to share what we had learned, what we had seen. My voice felt small at first, faltering in the face of the enormity of our revelation. Listeners, I began, my voice gaining strength as the weight of our responsibility anchored me. Tonight, I bring you a truth that is stranger and more profound than any fiction we could imagine. We are not alone. Above us, among us, there are beings, entities from beyond our world, beyond our understanding. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, knowing they would be met with skepticism, disbelief, perhaps even fear. But silence was no longer an option. These beings, these visitors, they are not here to harm us, at least not in the ways we might fear. But they are here with purpose, with intent that we cannot fully comprehend yet. I recounted the events of that night, the silent craft, the beam of light, the otherworldly figures that seemed to study the very essence of our being. They communicated not with words, but with a presence that was felt deep within the mind. They examined not our lands, but us, our reactions, our fears, our capacity for understanding. The message I had to convey was not just one of warning, but of awareness. We must open our eyes to more than what is seen. We must think beyond our daily concerns and consider the broader universe of which we are a part. These visitors, they've shown us that we are part of a much larger cosmos, a network of life that extends beyond our wildest imaginations. The tone of my message shifted from revelation to a call to action. This is not the time for fear, nor for blind disbelief. It is a time for courage, for open-mindedness, and most importantly, for rigorous pursuit of understanding. We must learn from them as they have undoubtedly learned from us. I spoke of the need for a preparedness. We must develop strategies, not of defence against a supposed invasion, but of communication and engagement. We must forge a path that leads to mutual understanding and possibly, one day, to cooperation. As the broadcast came to a close, I felt the weight of every word, each sentence a ripple in the pond of human awareness. Keep watch, stay informed, and remain ever curious, for in curiosity there lies the key to our future, a future where we might stand not just on the precipice of the unknown, but step boldly into it. The red light blinked off, and silence returned to the room. Helen and I exchanged a look, a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Our work was far from over. It was perhaps just beginning. But one thing was clear. We had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. In the quiet that followed, I reflected on the journey, my own transformation from skeptic to believer, from observer to participant. The universe had opened a door, and we had walked through it, not just to confront what was on the other side, but to invite it in, to learn, to adapt, and to prepare. This was our new reality, our mission, to not only believe in the existence of others, but to embrace the challenges and opportunities that such knowledge presented. The truth was out there, and now it was also within us. We were all, in some way, changed forever.